here's Brody Brazil.
So this video might get a little confusing. Let me explain right here, right now, what I'm trying to do. This is my weekly look back at the San Francisco Giants, but it's also going to involve some comparisons and some contrasting with the Oakland A's, which is obviously the other team that I watch very closely on an everyday basis. And I just felt like the A's were a perfect comparison here to try and help Giants fans wonder, are things going to get better anytime soon? Is this really what the Giants are going to look like for the rest of the summer? And how things actually play out over the course of a 162-game season. So let's begin with the comparisons again, A's and Giants side by side. And you understand why the ambitions are so much higher in San Francisco. They're coming off like about a 500 season, a manager change, a coaching staff change. They had some huge offseason acquisitions. Of course, I'm explaining to you. You know this. Being a Giants fan, you know what the winter was all about. Not getting Ohtani, but getting several other key pieces, Soler and Chapman and Snell, and building the team out that way and spending a little bit more than they typically do. As for the A's, they're coming off a 50-win season. They didn't spend much more than they did last year. This is a look at their current payroll. You're going to see different numbers like a opening day payroll, a 26-man roster payroll, but this is basically where the two teams sit right now. The A's are less than a third of the payroll than the San Francisco Giants, but none of that is actually translating into the overall record. The Giants were getting closer to 500, inching closer to that. Now they've taken a couple steps back from that. Meanwhile, the A's got to 500, 17-17 before they lost yesterday, now carrying a 17-18 record. So how is that even possible that one team on paper has a way more experienced and proven roster, likely better players, and they have fewer wins and more losses, as the Giants do, than the A's? And again, why am I doing this? You'll kind of understand, hopefully, at the end of this video. And it's the nature of a long season, the course of 162 games. The Giants are actually scoring a few more runs per game, point something, than the A's, 3.74 runs per game for San Francisco, 3.56 for the A's, who have also been shut out a bunch of times, but they also scored 20 runs. So it's all of these wide fluctuations right now. Let me just say for San Francisco that their offense, to me, still remains one of the issues. Bullpen, here and there, fine. Starting rotation, for the most part, and some certain figures have done the job, but they just cannot score enough to make themselves consistently competitive in games. When was the last time they put up 7s and 8s or 6s and 9s and 11s? I mean, it just does not happen very often. It feels like when you're tuning into a game or you're seeing a final score, they'll maybe get to 3 or 4 on an every game basis, and there you go. Their average is 3.74. Overall team ERA, Giants pitchers have not been as good as the A's, and quite honestly, the A's bullpen recently went through a more than a week stretch of not allowing a run. So when you look at overall team ERA, the Giants have been just a little bit worse in that category. But why should we even be comparing these two teams? One was strategically and better built and way more spent on. The A's obviously didn't make hardly any big offseason acquisitions and are relying on their youth to get better in terms of improvement. Run differential also favors the A's. Both these teams are in the minus. The A's at a minus 23, the Giants at a dash 36. So it goes to show you, not only have they been beat more times than they win games, they're also losing by significant margins. A negative 36 in the run differential column already for San Francisco. And that brings us to team home runs. Now, the Giants hit 2 more yesterday to get them to 32. The A's didn't homer. By the way, the A's were on a stretch of homers in 17 out of 19 games. They've been homering like crazy. Do I expect that pace? I mean, they're top 5 in the league right now in homers at 44. Do I expect that to continue? Probably not. Do I expect this number to go way up? Yeah. When Chapman and Soler and even Conforto to a certain degree start leaving the yard on a more frequent basis. That has not really happened like a lot of people expected so far. And then here's kind of a main point. Now, I don't know how important you might see this or anybody might see this, but the A's were recently on, and it went up to this weekend, a 6-game win streak. The most wins the Giants have put together in a row is 2. Now, it's happened 3 different times, but 2 and then a loss. A week later, win 2 more in a row. and then a loss. They cannot really get traction. They cannot get on a roll. They cannot vibe. And I'm not here to pin that on the rotation. I'm not here to pin that on any one specific thing, the bats or the bullpen or team defense. And by the way, we'll talk about that in a second. They just have not gotten on any type of roll yet. Now, it's early, but you've got to see that from any good team. Even a 500 team has to rack off 4, 5, 6 wins at some point in their season. The A's have already done it. Last year, they only won 50 games. Did the A's? They had a 7-game win streak at their most. It just goes to show you a win streak does not define your season, but it just tells what I think is a very specific story about the Giants this year. They can win some games here and there. They just cannot put together a whole series. They can't sweep, obviously, just winning 2 games. Heck, the A's almost swept 2 straight series, but obviously lost yesterday. So all of that brings me to the big difference of these two teams. And again, this is a Giants video. This is the Giants' perspective. I'm using the A's here as part of the example. Because everybody looks at the A's overperforming and is saying right now, is this sustainable over the long span of 162 games in a season? And that's a very legitimate question. Are you really going to homer like 146 games out of 162? Because that's kind of the pace they've been on lately. And the home runs, if you watch the games and keep score, that's been giving them a bulk of their runs, like more than 50% of their runs scored this year have come via home run. So I don't know if that is entirely sustainable. And their bullpen being flawless for more than a week at a time, and their starters doing what they've done. I don't know if that's sustainable. But it also brings me to a question on the other side of the bay. In San Francisco, people are wondering, is this going to get better? Will this team improve? Will we see more and better results in the near future? And that's the whole 162-game point of this entire video. And I know that sounds like a cliche thing to say. It sounds so basic and almost pointless because it's so simple to understand. The Giants are no doubt better on paper than they have performed so far this season. But that's what happens in a baseball season. Things tend to even out in terms of players and stats and teams. And I'm also here to say that if you're San Francisco, there's one thing you definitely don't want to do in the months of April and even into May. Now, I've been saying all along they needed to exit the month of April with a 500 record. That's a perfect way to start. You've had a lot of change. You've had a lot of transition. And there's a lot of teams that do quite well with a 500 record or close to it exiting April. Well, they were short of that. And now they're here in the month of May, and there is kind of a concern that you don't want to peak right now. You absolutely don't want to, like if the A's are peaking right now, that's bad. You don't want to do that. But you also don't want to dig yourself such a hole that it is impossible to break out of it June and July, and you have to exert yourself so much to go on this streak and this run of games that it's nearly impossible to catch up and end where you're supposed to. And I think right now that plays into a little bit of the mental side of the game and a team that's pressing, and that complicates matters. And I will bring up one individual who I absolutely know, and I've known him for a very long time. I've watched him play a lot of baseball games. Matt Chapman has made, I think it's up to like 6 errors this season, and he's made a couple in the recent week that are uncharacteristic. Now, don't get me wrong. Some balls hit his way. The one that went through his legs was a screamer. It was a one-hopper. But typically, Matt Chapman makes that play in Philadelphia 99.5 times out of 100. And he didn't right there. And there were a couple other plays I know you'll remember in your recent memory too. And that's not typical of Matt Chapman, and that makes me think that even somebody like himself, who's on a new team, who still feels like they're making a first impression, he's pressing right now. And if the team were winning and he were struggling, he would still feel like pressing, but it wouldn't be as significant because, well, the team was doing fine. In this case, the team is not doing great. They're doing okay, but everybody kind of has that pressing mindset. And if Chappie's feeling that way, I wonder how Soler is feeling. I wonder how others are feeling, even some members of the starting rotation. I wonder what the mentality is right now. And as I look at this team and as I watch games, I think that whole win streak thing I talked about, never getting past 2 wins in a row, maybe that's why they're missing some of the fire and the confidence and the body language and, I don't know, a little bit of that charisma. It's not Riz, is it? But, charisma, right? They're missing that body language and that confidence that goes with teams that get on a roll. And maybe it's simply the fact that they just haven't earned it for themselves yet. They don't feel that way, so they're not going to exert themselves that way. But I feel like just watching the team, watching at-bats, watching situations where they're trailing in games and then they make a little push, but not really enough to come back. I mean, you don't want to be a Major League Baseball team that has ambitions of the playoffs, and if you're trailing by 3 in the 4th inning, you're thinking, well, there's no chance they can come back. Good teams find a way to come back. It's not a matter of if they'll win the game that day or night. It's who's going to do it and what will the story be? What will the comeback look like, the inevitable comeback? I don't know if the Giants are there yet in terms of being that type of team. So to answer the question and relating that a little bit to the A's, it's early. Some crazy things are happening in baseball. I mean, look at the divisional standings in pretty much every one of them across the league. There's a couple teams that are way higher than you'd expect. There's a couple teams that are way lower than you'd expect. I think the Giants are kind of right in the middle of that. They're obviously not higher. They're definitely not lower. I mean, things could be worse, but in terms of will things get better? Yeah, I think so. In the way that people are questioning whether the A's are sustainable, you got to ask yourself, isn't time going to take care of the San Francisco Giants? And if not, I mean, there are some ramifications to building a team up like this, and they still can't get it done. But as of right here, right now, I think it's time to pay more attention. It's still not time to be overly concerned with how this is going to go. I think that is still about a month away. Hey, you made it to the end of this video. You know I really appreciate that. Thumbs up down below. That'll greatly help me in this video and this channel. And by the way, you know I'd love to see you back here next time, so go down there and hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you back here again.